This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello, and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Kathryn and I are joined by Dave, one of our listeners and a fellow writer. This is the second Writers Book Club. And this month we are talking about Junot Diaz's short story, Fiesta 1980. So welcome, Dave. We are delighted to have you join us.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, first reactions to this story. First impressions, big reactions.
Okay, so I'm a fan of short stories, and my first reaction, and it's simmering. You read it, and the tension is simmering from the first paragraph, and it continues throughout the entire short story. Really, an amazing piece of writing in a short amount of time that really makes you want to continue and see what happens.
Yeah, and I love that you started with tension, because I don't know that I would expect a reader to say that about this story. Like, first thing is, it grabbed me with tension, and it's so true. But it's also kind of a quiet story about a family that goes to a party at the narrator's aunt and uncle's apartment in New York City. So let's talk about the tension. Let's dig into that, because I think that's a great starting point.
I just want to say that, you talk about the very first paragraph, and it ends, "He would have kicked our asses something serious." And if that doesn't grab your attention, and that's the end of the first paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the simmering tension comes from for me, and it goes on and is spaced very well through that story.
Yes. Yeah. Were you starting to say something else, Kathryn?
Yeah, I was saying the tension is really between the mom and the dad, and the boys are picking up on it. And the father is that unpredictable figure, right? He's the one that at any moment he could pop off and something violent could happen. And so that's where that always kind of what's going to happen next, is somebody going to get it feeling comes from, even though all they're doing is getting ready for a party.
Right. And I think it's so quietly delivered. It's a story. When I was reading it this time, I was thinking, this is a story about an abusive father, but it's not a story about an abusive father. That's such the undercurrent, which is where that tension comes from. It's simmering under what's really happening, and the narrator is so nonchalant about it, as I think children are in these situations, because it's the normal, it's the only normal they have. And he's got, I guess it's about the fourth page of the story, the narrator, Junior, it's on the top of 27, says, "Our fights didn't bother me too much," our being him and his father. "I still wanted him to love me, something that never seemed strange or contradictory until years later, when he was out of our lives."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't think this is a story about an abusive father. I think the abusive father is part of the story. I also don't think this is a story about a party or about the family going to the party. I think this is the story about him coming to the realization that the family's broken and that everyone in the family knows it, through the Puerto Rican woman and the ending statement where it's like, and everyone knew, right? So I think the story is much more about that revelation, and he's using the story within a story format to show you how broken his family actually is by them going to a party. and all of the tension that lives and exists in those simple day-to-day activities, and then showing you what has broken the family to begin with, which is the Puerto Rican woman.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Dave?
Well, I have, sure. I absolutely agree with that analysis. I would say that there's one sentence here that would have you believe that, yes, the family knows there is a problem because the aunt knows there is a problem. But very interestingly, on page 37, Pappy stopped me before I could get away from him. He kept his voice nice and low so nobody could hear him. If you eat anything, I'm going to beat you in 10 days. I nodded. And if your brother gives you any food, I'll beat him too. The point, what is going on in that family is very common, and they're keeping that secret. Even though the aunt knows, at this point, that apartment is filled with other people.
Mm-hmm.
He's loud, he's argumentative. That's the way he is. That's his personality. But this whole beating thing is within the family.
Right.
It's very much an alcoholic trait.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, every story is about more than one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So on the surface, we've got the dad who's abusive or a bruiser or smacks his kids around, right? This is 1980. And, there are people who talk about, like, what is abuse? Where is abuse? Is he just tough and authoritarian, or is he abusive? So I don't want to use that word in a way that gives someone a wrong impression about the story or thinks we're interpreting it a way the author may not have intended. But there's no question about the dad being a brute.
He's violent.
Yeah. He's unpredictable, hair trigger temper, those sorts of qualities. And then there's also the affair, and there's the lying and such, right? That we see on the page. But then there's that subtext, the other about, the thematic about, and I think you nailed it, Kathryn, when you said it's this realization of how broken the family is, and that they all know it, but they aren't talking about it. They're living with it. They aren't acknowledging it, And he does have one sentence in here. I think it's interesting. This early in the conversation, we've said there's that one sentence multiple times already.
That's the nature of short stories, right? It's the one sentence, not the one chapter, not the one scene, not that. It's the one sentence.
Right. Yes. And I'm trying to find it now. Okay, there it is. The affair was like a hole in our living room floor, one we'd gotten so used to circumnavigating that we sometimes forgot it was there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the thematic about that comes through in the subtext, this realization, I think it manifests in the story in one specific way, but I want to know what you guys think.
The thematic about?
Yeah, I think it comes through very clearly on the page, but I don't want to just say it out because I want to hear what you think. Because it's more fun that way.
I want to hear what Dave thinks first.
Well, that's maybe a little unfair. I'm just going to.
You can throw it back at me. It's okay.
I think the dad is misogynistic to a very large degree, and I think the theme is. I mean, he's got this thing going on the side. His wife seems to suspect, but when she asks the boys, they're not forthcoming with the information. But I would draw your attention. He jammed his finger into my cheek. this was the way he was with his punishments, imaginative. He writes a essay at school, My Father the Torturer, and the teacher makes him rewrite it. And not just tension, but fear. And so when you're looking for a theme here, there's an innocent family caught in this. Well, let's go back. And then he takes his boys to the mistress's house, almost as if he's incorporating them into this society of that this is okay and you're going to grow up and do it too. So I might as well introduce you to real life. So is that a theme? Dad looking for acolytes into his misbehavior? I'm not that good of a thinker, but gee, the kid wrote a story, My Father the Torturer, and the teacher thought he was joking. So go back and write it again. 1980 or not, that's like, wow.
Yeah, it's that theme of the brokenness, I think, which is what you're picking up on. And I think for me, it was the puking and the van that really underscored that brokenness, because that's woven in through all of those moments where things are so obviously broken. And he bought the van. Why? Right. He takes it to the Puerto Rican woman's house. He's showing off. He brings his kids in the van it's like you said, it's like he was trying to say, this is okay. Look at me. Look how awesome I am. And meanwhile, what does it make his son do? Every time he gets in the van, he pukes because of how it's literally sickening.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think of what the puking represents. His father turns him into a secret keeper, and he can't hold it in. He can't keep that down. And every time he's near the van, which, as you were just saying, Kathryn, represents the affair and the father's bad behavior as the misogynist, and I think also as the abuser, it makes Junior throw up. And it's this very apparent outward manifestation of the secrets that everybody is keeping of that hole in the living room floor, right? That they just are so used to.
And I think with short stories, you can get away with being a lot more thematic and having that be the climax moment. And we've talked before about how short stories don't have to have much of an ending, right? So they can kind of hit the climax and be done. And the very end of the story, sorry, I'm just going to read the last.
Yeah, please do.
The last couple sentences. It says, where do I want to start? Just the last paragraph, I guess. In the darkness, I saw that Poppy had a hand on Mommy's knee and that the two of them are quiet and still. They weren't slumped back or anything. They were both wide awake, bolted into their seats. I couldn't see either of their faces, no matter how hard I tried. I could not imagine their expressions. Neither of them moved. Every now and then, the van was filled with the bright rush of somebody else's headlights. Sorry. Finally, I said, Mommy. And they both looked back, already knowing what was happening. And that's where, for me, that's the thematic and physical all rising to that climax right there. Everybody already knows what's happening. And you see that through the paragraph, through them being upright, bolted to their seats. He's got his hand on her. She's not leaning into it for comfort. She doesn't want it there, maybe. I don't know. But they're just both kind of existing. Right. And somebody else's headlights are looking in on them, but they aren't, it's not an intimate moment. It's like this glaring, blaring, like viewpoint. And then all of a sudden it's like, and here comes the puke.
Right.
Right. And everybody already knows what's happening, which I just thought was so, it's just so beautifully crafted to wrap up both the physical climax. They've ended the party. They're going home to a broken home in a, van that makes the kid puke because of the brokenness of his family. And you get that picture of the two parents not being really together while they're together. So fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that really strikes me about that moment is the stillness of it, because the whole story is full of movement and activity. The characters are always interacting. There's so much dialogue. There's so much happening. And at this party, Junior expects his mom and dad to blow up. He expects a big fight. He says he's never gone anywhere with his family and had it not turned shit, right? But the blow up doesn't happen. They even dance together a little bit, not for long, but they do dance. And we have this closing moment in the car where it's quiet. The other kids are asleep. Mom and dad aren't talking, aren't fighting. It's this forward movement. And they're touching, there's physical contact, but it's not comfortable touching, right? It's like you're used to it. It's complacent, but it's not warm. It's not comfortable. And then that puking right at the end, knowing what's coming, it breaks that moment apart. We know that's disrupting this one moment of stillness in the story. And it's like, it's shattering. Right? Even though it's just a kid throwing up in a car, it feels
like the shattering of the family is what it feels like.
Right. Like the shattering of the family. Yeah.
So I think overall the beauty of this story and the genius of the author is that he is able to present this through a very young boy. And the author is not a young boy. So this is a consummate skill on the part of an author. And then meanwhile, we're seeing the world through these, the young boy's eyes. And there are times when authors are just geniuses. And I would just tell you to look carefully, whoever reads this, about what the mommy does every time before he goes to the drive. She blesses him with the cross. She gives him mints to take the sour taste out of his mouth. And the one time that she asks about the drive, her husband says, "Shut up." Right? And so I just marvel at the skill of the author. And it's of course why he's been given prizes for his writing, because you're right there. You're feeling this, and then meanwhile we're seeing the world through these young eyes who don't understand everything. And the last thing I would say is that it is so Big Brother like, because Rafa has been on the brunt of this, and so when Junior is getting punished, what does he do? He moves away. He's like, I really don't want to go down this path and be hit too and beaten. So that's where, in the beginning, I said this is the tension began immediately, and it ended, as Kathryn just said, with the tension that we know what's going to happen. Okay. So.
Yeah. So speaking of the narrator, Dave, he gives us just maybe 2 or 3 sentences where we get a sense of the chronological distance between the narrator, Junior, and the character, Junior, when he says, like, I wouldn't know until years later. So we get a sense that the narrator is mature and looking back. So does it feel good as a reader? Would you make the same choice as a writer to let the reader know Dad gets out of their life? I think twice he references that, so that we know this family is freed of Dad, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We know 3 things about Junior. We know that he's observing. 2, we know that he's the brightest one. That comes out. And 3, the way that I took that, exactly the way that I took that was, yes, we're going to be left with this, what's coming, but that one sentence was, there's hope. And I can argue whether he should have done that or not, but I don't think it detracts from the story. I think actually it makes me feel better, because obviously Junior survives and he's articulate enough to put this into some kind of context and hopefully healing. So I thought it was very effective, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's a strong undercurrent of protection of their mom in here, from the narrator, but also you see it in the boys, the way they act, but like the narrator's recollections of the way his mom smelled, or the touch of her hand that was never sweaty, and all of these little details that show like true affection and like almost a very protective nature toward their mother versus their father, right? The sides kind of have been drawn appropriately. But I think having that in there where he says until he was out of our lives gives us that these boys stuck with their mama feeling.
Right.
which is I think what you need in this moment, because Poppy is so hard to swallow. He's not a nice guy. And so you want, like you said, to have that hope and to say this is a broken family that is going to in some way mend. It first has to break, right? And this is that moment where it's going to shatter, and then they can start from there picking themselves up and figuring out what this new reality looks like.
Right. Yeah, I agree that those sentences are necessary, and that they do give us some hope, and that, relationship with the mother. One thing, so those sentences do give me some hope, because Poppy's going to get out of their lives. That stuff is going to end for them. But there's no sense of then what happens for mommy. How does she survive? Does she find another husband? Does she have to start working a bunch of part-time jobs? Are the boys old enough? We don't know any of those things about what comes next. And so, being a short story and being tight and compact, it leaves all of that open for us to imagine the way we want it to be, as dark or as light, as realistic or as unrealistic, as we choose to make it. But I think I want to say some more about the brilliance of this writing, and spin off of what you were saying, Dave. He characterizes mommy so carefully. We get that paragraph where he talks about the photograph he found of his mother before she met Poppy. Mm-hmm. And there's that line that this was the woman she thought she would always be. And it just strikes at the heart, because we know she's not that woman anymore. And it's because of this relationship with her husband. And then we see her with her sister, Tia Irma, and they're laughing and doing stuff he knows they've always done their whole lives, because they're siblings. And he's got that one sentence where he says the big difference between his mother and Tia Irma is that Tia Irma smiles a lot. Right. And so I think those characterizations of the mother in the past and with her sister connect to those sentences that give us that flash forward, that give us some hope, not just for Junior, not just for the children, but also for the mother. I think we would lose that without that characterization of mommy, which is very specific. And they're sad in the moment, because she's not that woman anymore, and she doesn't smile like her sister. But they also show us who she could go back to being without her husband.
I almost feel like this is seated, like the ending is seated in the middle. And again, with a short story, like part of that beauty is you get to play with it, right? But I feel like he gave us all these little clues to what the ending is in the middle, with his whole until years later when Poppy wasn't in our life. And then, his Tia just moved up to the city, right? I'm assuming to America, with her husband, and they just have a brand new house. And then her and their mom spend the entire time talking, and in a conversation, you almost see this like plan forming, right? Like where if something happened, she has support now that she maybe didn't have before, which I feel like is, again, it's like you can pull all sorts of different endings out. And you totally could. There's multiple things, but I think it's cool to seed those little nuggets in there to where somebody could reasonably come up with an ending. without having to spell it out.
Mm-hmm. Right. And if it were a story about the van and the Puerto Rican woman and the brother and didn't have the party, didn't have the aunt, we would lose that sense of hope because we would lose those seeds.
Yeah. We would lose that family support system, and we would lose, seeing her interacting with her sister, or the one time she smiles in the whole party when she looks across at her son. Like, I just, cute little moments that indicate hope.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for listening to today's Storyworks Roundtable. I've got 4 new dates scheduled for the rest of this season's Writer's Circle. This is a free office hour type call. You just pop in, ask questions, pick my brain, chat craft with other writers. We always have a ton of fun on these calls. So head over to wordessential.com/events and get registered for the upcoming Writer's Circle. If you haven't yet, please check out A Room Full of Books and Pencils. That is my newsletter on Substack, where I write about life, writing, and the writing life, including writing tips. And subscribers get transcripts of the Storyworks Roundtable podcast. A bit of good news here. Saving Annabelle, my historical novel manuscript, has been shortlisted for the Page Turner Award. So we've gone from finalist to longlist, and now we're on the shortlist. I hope you'll join me in rooting for Greta and Annabelle, my characters, my protagonists in that story, as they get to the finish line at the Page Turner Awards. Yeah. What else?
Ooh, can we talk about this, the metaphors and the imagery?
Yeah.
I went through and highlighted a whole bunch. This guy's language is so, the images are fantastic. I'm trying to think, let's see, like the wind through a tree, or, like the sun sliding out of the sky, like spit off of a wall, he's got these fantastic images that kind of speak to the kids, like it's a kid saying it almost, even though it's for the narrator's got distance, right? But it's still got that kid feeling to it. Like my curse, I'm trying to see. Had this one look, furious and sharp, that always left me feeling bruised. Just the way that he describes things are just very vivid and sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to pick up on that, I think the one that I circled, because it just fits so well. It's when they arrive and the aunt greets everybody, but then she hesitates before the dad. And then the description is she froze a little, like maybe she had seen a wasp on the tip of his nose.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Such a great line.
I think that it's hard to argue with writing that good, because it encapsulated how you're starting to feel.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, all of these examples of imagery and description, it characterizes the voice of this narrator, and it comes through in the first paragraph where we're just getting set up, and the introduction, we're just making our way into the story. I'll go ahead and read it. Mommy's youngest sister, my tia Irma, finally made it to the United States that year. She and Tio Miguel got themselves an apartment in the Bronx off the Grand Concourse, and everybody decided that we should have a party. Actually, my pops decided, but everybody, meaning Mommy, Tia Irma, Tio Miguel, and their neighbors, thought it a dope idea. Right away you're hearing this youthful voice. He might be 13 or something. He's just getting interested in girls, but he can't talk to them yet, kind of thing. And as soon as I read Thought It a Dope Idea, I was in it. I was grabbed. I knew this narrator, right? Yeah. I had enough of a sense of this narrator for characterization, for specificity, for the unique qualities of this storyteller. And I was invested in it because that voice just comes off the page.
Yeah, the voice and the way that he describes things, just like you said, it automatically characterizes things. The very next paragraph, the brothers' relationship, Rafa gave me the look and I gave it back to him. That tells you so much about the brothers. They're not exactly, one on top of the other, even though Rafa's the big brother. Like, he's going to give the look right back to his brothers. So there's a little bit of that rivalry. They're, close-ish in age, or at least close enough to be able to do that. And I just thought, and that's just the look.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's all it took.
Yes.
Well, I think also what you read, again, I like to read, I like short stories, but in that first paragraph, we get a boatload of information. Mm-hmm. One, Junior has been in the United States for a while, and his aunt is now arriving. Two, I doubt if where he came from, a dope idea was the slang they use. So we know that he's been acclimated enough to use the slang at the time. So very quickly he sets the stage. And so we get a picture. Somebody's come, they've been waiting to come, he's been there, and all of that. And so we're watching him, for lack of a better term, be Americanized as an immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good too. I mean, it's part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right.
I just want to go back because you said something, and I think that the blessing here is that the sister did come, but and while they're close and they're talking, the sister does not know the whole story yet. She's just arrived, and when she takes him outside to give him the secret treats, he specifically says, "I knew an interrogation when I saw one." And like families in secret, he's like, well, I really didn't give up any information.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we know is going to come later is the sister's going to find out things, and that support network is going to come into play. And I think that really is the hope. And it makes you wonder, if the sister hadn't come, what would happen?
Mm-hmm.
Because then mom would be all by herself without that network. So I do happen to think she will land on her feet, and it's because of that family connection, that bond. And again, you can edit this out, fine. I don't, but I think women have that bond much stronger and much earlier in life, and it's really a saving grace in these situations if they're lucky enough to have that bond.
Mm-hmm. Right.
An observation, not a. That's all.
Right. No, I agree. And I think the moment where Tia Irma asks Junior if there have been any fights and such, and he says, no, Dad's at work too much. And she says work like it's, what's the line? Like it's the name of somebody she doesn't like or something. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's another one of those beautiful sentences that just encapsulates so much. And so we know through the subtext of that moment that Tia Irma doesn't know for sure, but she suspects, and she's not getting the story from her sister because her sister's not ready to give it up yet, but she's looking to the nephew. All of these family dynamic things are happening. And one of the brilliant things Diaz does in this story is he gives it to us in action and dialogue. He doesn't go into narrative exposition to fill in the blanks and give us a lot of backstory. I think we could go through the whole story and not have a sense of the chronological distance between narrator and character, if not for those 3 moments where he references years passing. Because we are so present in the moment with Junior, and it comes through in the voice and the interaction with the brother and everything that's on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think anybody who lives through experiences, and then whether it's in real life or through fiction, then we get to see that they write about it, probably is the greatest hope you can have, right? Because if they don't write about it, then you have no hope. So this, through Diaz, this kid, I bet you grows up fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I take it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have that sense too. I don't have any sort of gloomy outlook for Junior or the family, really. Not that everything will be peachy once Poppy leaves, but it does not leave us, even though that end note, as we've already said, has this feeling of the world is about to shatter. I am left feeling like things are ultimately better for the family.
It's a survival story.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a tragedy.
Right.
I had to document the story, so I just as an aside, so this is 1980, and this is actually before a lot of research has come out and been done that lots of people can recover from very tough situations through the act of writing. And so this is something that caught my attention when this occurred, and yet I don't think the author would have known of that research because it's been ongoing and has accelerated. And in so many cases today, therapy is used, writing is used as a therapy to free us from what had imprisoned us from the experiences we had in our youth. Which again, makes him a genius in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know what year this was published. I don't have my copy of the book in front of me because I wanted to write on my pages. So I just have the printout of the story. I mean, the book came out, I want to say, in the 2010s. I think it came out when I was in my MFA program. So it might have been 2009, 2010, 11, right around there. Do you know what year it came out, Kathryn?
It says 1997.
Really? That long ago?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, there you go. I guess it didn't hit my radar until around 2000.
Yeah, publication date July 1st, 1997.
And that was part of other work at that time, right? That was
it's a collection.
It's a collection. So it could have been written even earlier, right? I mean, but it doesn't matter. My point is, yeah.
It's writing as therapy. Even
exactly.
if it wasn't his personal experience, it feels therapeutic as a story, even if it,
Right. And I don't know for certain, but I think there is an autobiographical element to this collection, but I don't know to what extent it's fiction or dramatization and to what extent it's autobiographical. So I don't want to misstep. And, of course, our job is to read what's on the page and take what's on the page as its own living entity, because it's not memoir, it's published as fiction. It's not presented to us by the author as memoir. But that said, I have a quote from Junot Diaz. The absolute safety of your soul will depend on whether you can find the community or the courage to bear witness to what has happened to you. And that's apparently from 2013. So I think that's a beautiful quote that certainly supports what Dave was saying about writing and how healing it is.
So according to the Amazon page, the description and then the biography for the author, at the very least, they came from the same place and went to the same place, right? So from the Dominican Republic to New Jersey. So he is writing about his experiences, even if they aren't all his personal experiences, which I think is awesome.
Right.
Fictionalizing something that you went through, at least in part, maybe even to deal with that, the depth of that immigrant experience.
Right.
I thought the writing was most similar to James McBride's Deacon King Kong, and because I'm enthralled with writing like this that gives me a picture of backgrounds and cultures that I did not grow up in. And both, I mean, that's for me a big litmus test of an author. So I feel like I know something that I didn't know before. And I just throw that out that about I believe his name is James McBride, who wrote another excellent piece of writing. Giving us a view of worlds that we didn't live in. I didn't live in. So,
and yet fully accessible.
Right. Yeah. Yes, totally. So what craft element are you as a writer going to take away from the experience of reading Fiesta 1980 by Junot Diaz? What just blew your little writer socks off?
I like the story within a story. In such a short space, he still told almost two complete narrative arcs, one with the Puerto Rican woman and him visiting the Puerto Rican woman, all interspersed within the Fiesta, and use that together to create one story about his family.
How about you, Dave?
So I read it a few times, and then I went back, and then I underlined. I don't know the terminology, the beats, the tension, and I just thought the way that he structured and the pauses between the tension really grabbed me, and I think about things that I've written and the importance of. Too much tension on, or too many things happening in one chapter does not make for a good read. And so if I go through there and as I did underline those sentences, it's like, okay, you get this, and then we have this kind of lull. It's not even backstory, but it's like seeing the world, and then there's more tension, and then more tension, and then. As Kathryn and you both mentioned, then at the end we come to this lots of tension because we know what's going to happen, and it's off the page. I think that's art. I think I'm deficient when I write because I don't certainly have a handle on that. But
we all feel that way.
Yeah.
Whenever you read something that is so beautifully crafted, you always go, I could never write that way. But that's not entirely true. I think everybody has their own way of creating something beautiful. And we can learn so much by admiring everybody's art.
Yeah.
And remember, this is a finished draft.
Yeah.
This is true. The one that, was probably in a literary journal and then in a collection. Right. Very true. Okay. So for me, I think it's the lack of narrative exposition. I mean, I like narrative exposition. Use it plenty, but to see a writer craft such a tight, dramatic, compelling story with hardly any narrative exposition. When there is narrative exposition, it's filling in backstory, but it's like Junior is giving us an aside. It's not like the chronologically distant grown-up Junior is going, oh, say, by the way, let me explain this or describe that, right? It very much flows with the action. And, I think that's powerful and worth taking note of.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Wow. Well, great read, Dave. I'm so happy you joined us today. Thank you
for
very
allowing
much.
me the opportunity. You're going to edit this out. I had the opportunity to see Abraham Verghese at Talking Volumes last week. This is the second time I've seen him. And that guy is an amazing writer. I have not read the new book, Covenant of Water, but I read Cutting for Stone. And that's another experience. And it's always it's always uplifting to be around people who have taken the craft to levels that I would only dream about. I mean, and it's very inspiring. I know you've talked about Talking Volumes and that stuff, but there's no substitution for good writing or good authors.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And I think that's why we're doing the Writers Book Club now, is so that we can add that element of inspiration to what we do here at the round table. And hopefully everybody reads along and, joins us and benefits from these stories. I think as writers, reading quietly to ourselves is one thing. Reading with ourselves and taking note of what we observe is another thing. But then having a conversation with other writers and getting multiple perspectives and multiple insights and multiple, hey, here's what I noticed. That just opens up the world of the craft of these pieces so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, stories speak differently to each and every one of us, which is what makes them so good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I enjoy both of your comments and have for a long time now. And Kathryn, my daughter's middle name is Kathryn after my mother. So you already have this whole big leg up in my...
So we're already connected.
Yeah, we are connected. It's one of my favorite names, obviously, or
Woohoo.
Sarah wouldn't have it. And I so enjoyed in past times when your daughter was younger. And,
yeah.
And that was very joyful for me to see that. So,
good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.